Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mark. I'm going to talk about fantasy football again. Sorry, it's been a little bit. Kind of had some stuff going on. Last video I did the AFC West, and now we're going to be moving on to the other conference in the NFL, the NFC, and I'm going to start with the NFC East. But two quick things about the AFC West that I left out on the last one that I think are important. I don't know why I didn't mention this, but the thing that with the Chargers, they're both pertain to the Chargers. So the Chargers defense last year, so if you didn't remember, like I said, they were kind of like ranked in the middle last year, but they were underrated. But I forgot to leave out that like a big reason that they're underrated is because Joey Bosa was injured for a lot of last season, and he's fully healthy again. And that's one of the best defensive rushers in the NFL. So I mean, their defense is loaded, and I think that's another reason. So you need to watch out for them now that they have Joey Bosa back. And then the other thing is that I saw an article from ESPN the other day that said that Melvin Gordon apparently I guess he's unhappy with his contract and he wants a new deal. So he basically what he did is he's demanding a trade if the Chargers don't give him a new deal. That I think is kind of he expects something around like probably what Todd Gurley or Le'Veon Bell ended up getting. So I honestly don't think anything's going to become of it. I think that they'll probably give him a deal, but there's something to watch out for because it definitely causes a lot of fantasy implications if he leaves to go to another team. So just keep an eye on that. So let's get into the NFC East now. The first team I'm going to start with is the Dallas Cowboys. So Dallas, good season last year. They won the division. Kind of went on a run at the end of the year, and their defense got a lot better. So what is their team going to look like this year? So starting off, they've got a pretty nice schedule fantasy-wise. They are versus the New York Giants. They go at Washington on the road, then versus the Dolphins at New Orleans. So that's four matchups right there that could potentially be great. And then Green Bay, another one, and the Jets. So I mean, but that I mean that's a very good slate to start out with. But then at the end of the year, they got in the fantasy playoff time, they've got at Chicago versus the Rams and at the Eagles, which are all tough matchups. So keep in mind that a lot of these players might have very high value at the beginning of the season and put up a lot of numbers, but might not stay that way throughout the season going into the playoffs. So let's start with Dak Prescott, their quarterback. So Dak Prescott is pretty much about average quarterback in the NFL. He ranked 13th last year, which is right around about the line of starter versus waivers if you're in a 12-team league. Personally, like, Dak had some very good games at times, but I'm not a big fan of him because I think he's pretty inconsistent, and I think the offense is somewhat conservative for the type of value he can provide. He does provide some nice value in that he is a running quarterback and that he has some games where he throws a couple touchdowns, but he also has some games where he throws a lot of interceptions or where he really doesn't throw the ball at all because they're in a defensive battle, which I think is going to be a common theme in this division. So I personally would stay away from Dak Prescott, but he is somebody that I think that if he's there late in the draft, it's really not too bad of a take, especially if you fill up on your other positions. But I wouldn't personally take him over some of the other guys that I'm looking around in that position. Running back. So the running back is Zeke Elliott, and Zeke Elliott is elite. He's one of the five that I talked about that he's in a class of his own. I personally like him as the number 3 running back in PPR leagues, and I would say maybe the second or third in standard. It's a toss-up between him and Christian McCaffrey if you're looking at standard leagues, but I think that Zeke Elliott is going to be the focus of this offense, and he's somebody that not a bad guy to have on your team, especially if you're at the beginning of the draft. But the thing is that with Zeke Elliott, if you own Zeke Elliott, you want to make sure you have his handcuffs because he is that good. And who's his handcuffs going to be this year? Well, in the draft they got a guy named Pollard in the 4th round. He's supposedly he's not a particularly fast running back, but he is a big bruising type running back on 1st and 2nd down, which is something that the Cowboys excel at because their offensive line is so good. They clear spaces for their team, and they're getting healthy again. So Pollard is somebody that I think you want to have if you have Zeke Elliott. And another guy that got up on the team is Weber, who's a 7th round pick, I believe, out of Ohio State. That's another guy to potentially consider if anything were to happen to Pollard. But you know, you need to have his handcuff if you own Zeke Elliott, because there's so much value there with that offensive line. Receiving core. So the receiving core with the Cowboys starts with Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper, he was, if you didn't remember, he was traded to the Cowboys from the Raiders last year. He started poorly with the Raiders, but then he went to the Cowboys, and so his overall season value was number 19 receiver. But the last, from week 9 on, when he started settling in with the Cowboys, he was the number 9 receiver in fantasy football. So just excellent top 10 receiver, potentially underrated value, because a lot of people he kind of fell a little bit under the radar, but you know, a lot of people don't really have trust in how consistent he is. But if the last couple games of the season showed you anything, it's that Dak Prescott and him have great rapport together, and I think this is a guy that you should consider drafting, and I'd say he's probably going to go around the 3rd round. I think that would be a pretty good take, because he has a lot of upside to be potentially a top 5 receiver if depending on how much he's used. Some other guys, they got Randal Cobb from the Cowboys, or excuse me, from the Packers, and I really like Randal Cobb because Randal Cobb, a good slot receiver. He's kind of filling into what Cole Beasley did for them last year, but Randal Cobb is easily better than Cole Beasley. The thing with Cobb is that he hasn't really stayed healthy the last few seasons, but if he can get that together, then this is a perfect opportunity for him, and I think he could be a late round sleeper that people will kind of forget about, and really could be a lot of value to you. Some other guys to consider, they have Michael Gallup, who's kind of a young guy. He hasn't really shown a lot of consistency yet, but there is potential there. I'm not the biggest fan of him personally, though. And then Alan Hearns, who I really don't see much value in him at all, because he's kind of didn't really show much last year. He's kind of getting older. All right, so tight end. All right. Do not draft Jason Witten. Jason Witten came out of retirement. He was a commentator last year. Honestly, he might even be a better commentator right now than he is a football player, which really is not saying that much, because he was a horrible commentator last year on Monday Night Football. So I don't know why anybody thinks that Jason Witten is going to be coming back to his old form. If they do, then they're stupid. The guy that you want on this team as a tight end, I don't even know how high this. I don't even know if this guy will even get drafted at all. Is Blake Jarwin? Blake Jarwin had a game towards the end of the season last year. We had 3 touchdowns. I mean, if they're going to use any of these tight ends, Blake Jarwin has so much more upside than Jason Witten. You might get some good games from Witten, but that would just be such a stupid draft pick. Just don't even do it. I'm just telling you that here. Anyway, so defense. So Cowboys defense, they weren't very ranked statistically very high last year. They don't necessarily create a lot of turnovers per se, but they were a very good defense. And what I like about them is that there are a lot of young players that have played well, and they've together, and they're building more rapport. So I really like this team to potentially jump into the top 10, maybe possibly, top 5, but I don't know about that. But good defense that I think is going to be available for you at the end of the draft that you should take a flyer on. And their kicker, Brett Maher, I mean, he's pretty good too. He's got a nice leg. He's not necessarily always the most consistent kicker, but he is pretty good value for you to have, and I think he's somebody that you might want to consider at the end of the draft as well. All right, so that's all I got on the Cowboys. So now let's go to the New York Giants. New York Giants, so their schedule at the Cowboys versus the Buffalo Bills, at Tampa Bay versus Washington versus Minnesota, at New England versus Arizona. So some kind of up and down there. And then at the end of the season, they've got the Eagles, the Dolphins, which could be a very good matchup, and then at the Redskins. So kind of up and down. Not the greatest of fantasy schedules in the playoffs, but potentially could be good. There's a lot of transition on this team. They lost Odell. Not very expected to be very good, but there could potentially be fantasy value there. So let's start at quarterback. Eli Manning is back. He did not have a good season last year. He was the number 17 quarterback But I mean, in terms of fantasy production, he was modest. He gave you about an average of 17 points a game. But because the cute quarterbacks last year were so talented and putting up numbers across the board, he generally did not fare well compared to your opponent's quarterback. And I think you should stay away from him because he's getting older. He just lost his number one receiver, and I don't know how long he's going to hold on to this job with Daniel Jones in the fold. It's just there's too much uncertainty there to really waste your time. And then at running back, they've got Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, I think, is this is the number one running back in football. Like, he showed in his highlights just how like crazy he is. Just so much talent and ability. I mean, if you're at the top of the draft, it's very close between standard and PPR, like who you should take number one. But in a standard league, you definitely take Saquon Barkley number one. There's an argument to maybe made for Christian McCaffrey in PPR leagues, but Barkley he's gonna be the focus of this offense. He can catch. I mean, there's just so much potential there, and at his back. So you're talking about handcuffs with Zeke Elliott. Saquon Barkley's handcuff is Wayne Gallman, but the difference is that like with the Cowboys is that they have a very good line. The Giants' line is questionable. And I think Wayne Gallman could be decent value for you if you own Saquon Barkley, but he's not really a handcuff worth owning otherwise. Wide receivers. So, a couple changes. They picked up Golden Tate from the Eagles. They also have Sterling Shepard, and they got Corey Coleman, and they have some other guys like Benny Fowler and stuff. So let's start with Golden Tate. So Golden Tate is okay, so this is a potentially very underrated draft pick for you. A lot of people aren't really thinking about him very much. But when he was on the Lions last year and in Matt Stafford's high-octane offense, he was the number 7 wide receiver in the first 4 weeks of the season. So he has a great... He's got number one talent. His numbers kind of fell off last year with the Eagles because he was learning a new system and wasn't necessarily always needed for them. But in the Giants, like, now that Odell is gone, they really don't have a whole lot of other options other than Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram, who I'm going to get into a bit. But Golden Tate has a lot of talent and could potentially kind of fill some of that void that Odell left. And I think it could be great value for you as a number one receiver. This team is going to be losing a lot, and they're going to be throwing a lot. So I think Golden Tate has a lot of upside in the draft. Same can be said about Sterling Shepard. I mean, Sterling Shepard is more of a... Golden Tate is kind of who he is. Sterling Shepard has got more potential to get into a number one receiver slot on this team. But both these guys are pretty solid options, and I think that Sterling Shepard is somebody else that you should consider as a receiving option for them. But just understand that depending on what happens with Eli Manning and how long he's at the helm of this thing, if they turn it over to Daniel Jones, they could just become a Saquon Barkley offense, and these guys might lose their value. And Corey Coleman, I mean, that's an interesting flyer if you want to consider like deep threat potential. But I mean, this guy really did not show very much when he was on the Browns, and that kind of says stuff right there. And then Benny Fowler, like, just don't waste your time with that. Tight end. So their tight end is Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is a very talented young tight end. He kind of battled injuries last year, so didn't particularly rank very high. But a lot of people like him to be a potentially top 5 tight end because of the void left by Odell Beckham Jr. And although I do agree, I think Ingram is going to have a good season. I don't think that he's going to replace all the value of Odell. If anything, I think that the guy more likely to kind of, at least early on, to be the benefactor of all those targets is going to be Golden Tate, and then Sterling Shepard, and then Evan Ingram. So it just understand that there's going to be a lot of hype around Ingram, and he could get reached in the draft to get taken higher than his value could be. So just make sure you don't really fall into that trap, but it could be a very good tight end because he's got a lot of upside. And then just don't worry about the Giants' defense. They're not good at all. And then their kicker is Aldrick Rosas, who he was surprisingly in the Pro Bowl last year. He's not really one of the elite kickers that you think of, but he is solid. And I think there's potential that he could be a good value again this year because this team is going to be kicking a lot of field goals. They're going to be down. And I think that this is a guy that could he could benefit from all these missed opportunities that they'll probably have on offense. Okay, so next team is the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles are coming off the wild card. They won the Super Bowl the previous year, and some new faces to consider that we're going to get into here. So they start off the season versus the Washington Redskins, then they go to Atlanta, and then versus Detroit, and then at Green Bay, and then versus the Jets. So a lot of very nice matchups there at the beginning for this team, and then they go they host the Minnesota Vikings and the Cowboys. So then things start getting difficult, and then end of the season, NFC East gauntlet versus the Giants, at the Redskins, and then versus the Cowboys. So that's going to really define their season. But in terms of their fantasy production, let's take a look at their players. Starting with Carson Wentz, the quarterback. So Carson Wentz kind of battled injuries last year, struggled to be consistent, and was only the 22nd ranked quarterback. So his average points per game was 17.5, which is very close to Eli Manning's 17. So he really did not give you as much value as you anticipated last year. And that's why I'm kind of hesitant about taking him in the draft, because I'm not entirely sure like what Carson Wentz you're going to be getting. This guy is very athletic, but he's also very injury prone. And I'm just worried that, like, I'm not saying this is going to be another RG3 situation, but I just worry that you know, his 2017 season is really might be his peak, and things start dropping off from there. It's hard to tell, but this guy has a lot of talent. But I would not reach for him because there's so much risk that you could take, and I have a hard time envisioning him replicating everything from 2 seasons ago. All right, so this is one of my rules that you should always stick by, in my opinion. Do not draft Eagles running backs. This team loves to use the running back committee. You never know which ones they're putting in. You never know who's going to be consistent from game to game. And the backfield was even more crowded this year. So they got Jordan Howard from the Bears, which, like, he was not very consistent with the Bears at all last year. Then they got Miles Sanders, a rookie from Penn State, who got some kind of Saquon Barkley hype around him because he also went to Penn State, which that really doesn't make any sense. And then they returned some productive players from last year's backfield, like Corey Clement, Wendell Smallwood, and I believe his name is Jordan Adams. I'm not 100% sure what his first name is, but his last name's Adams. And, you know, I just see all these guys, like, crowding each other's touches, and I really don't know who's going to end up, like, being the number one guy on this team. It's just stay away from all these players, because they're going to, like, I mean, for all we know, like, Darren Sproles can come back from retirement again. It's just like, it's just such a mess. Like, just stay away from these running backs. I'm just telling you right now. And then, almost like with their receivers, it's kind of the same thing. I do like the receivers more. Like, I think Alshon Jeffrey is a solid take in the draft. There's the number one guy, but even though he was only the number 26 receiver last year, so even as a number one option, he wasn't really, like, standing out compared to some of these other teams' number one receivers. And he's another wildly inconsistent player that he either has a great game or sometimes goes with only, like, one catch. They got Deshaun Jackson, which, I mean, that's interesting. He's a good deep threat guy. He was actually the number 2 wide receiver through the first 4 weeks of the season last year when he was with Tampa Bay. But, it's we're going to really be dependent on how Carson Wentz can get the deep ball down the field to him, because Jackson primarily relies on that for his fantasy points. They also have Nelson Aguilar, who kind of fell out of favor. Wasn't really used as much when they had Golden Tate, but he was very productive last season before Golden Tate was acquired. So, you know, potential bounce back candidate too. And then a rookie that I think is worth considering as a flyer is J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. I think that's how you say his name. But he is kind of like the potential, like, void filler on this team. But the problem is that I don't really know how much of a void there really is to fill on this team, because this team doesn't typically rely on on one particular player. They like to spread the ball around. They like to confuse their opponents, almost kind of like the Patriots to a degree. So I think Whiteside is a good receiver to stash, but I wouldn't rely on him being a breakout star, because I really don't see that happening. Tight end. So another elite tight end, Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz scored 280 fantasy points last year in PPR, which, if you take Travis Kelce out, Travis Kelce had a historic season last year, but Ertz would have been the top tight end the 3 years prior to that with the numbers he had last year. But the thing is that Travis Kelce was there. So Zach Ertz, this is a team that loves throwing to tight ends, and I think that Zach Ertz is going to continue to be a favorite of Carson Wentz. So excellent tight end, and this is somebody worth reaching for in the draft, because of just the limited tight end landscape of people that can produce elite numbers for you. So definitely consider Zach Ertz if you're in that second, third round range. And Dallas Goedert is his backup. And I think this is the only situation in the NFL where you drafted a handcuffed tight end, because Dallas Goedert was still ranked 20th last year, even as primarily the backup tight end, because this team really likes using tight ends and using them in different plays. So I think that this is... I could see Goddard jumping into the top 5 if anything were to happen to Zach Ertz. So if you own Zach Ertz, you got to make sure you draft Dallas Goedert as well. Defense. So the defense was hurt a lot last year. Their secondary got destroyed. But I see them potentially as a bounce back candidate. And they reloaded with some new players as well. So I think this could be a good defense that kind of could return to its form in 2017, and somebody that I think could be available late in the draft that could be of good value to you. And their kicker is Jake Elliott. A lot of people seem to think that Jake Elliott is good, but just stay away from him because he's just not consistent. He really did not perform very well for you last year. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is the Washington Redskins. So the Redskins, a lot of changes on this team too. They got a new quarterback in the draft, Dwayne Haskins. So how's that going to affect the team? So their schedule, they start out Philadelphia, then they're versus Dallas, versus the Chicago Bears, at the Giants, versus New England, at Miami, and then versus San Francisco. So some up and down. And then at the end of the season, they're at the Packers, they're versus the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're versus the Giants. So could be some good matchups there, but the only thing is that this team's offense is not going to be good next year. And that's, as a Redskins fan, it's makes me sad that this team's offense has fallen so far over the last few years, but it's just I just don't see much of anything coming out of this season. So right now they have the starting quarterback listed as Colt McCoy, which, I mean, if you want to be a game managing team, then fine, but I mean, Colt McCoy's not bad, but I mean, this is a guy you do not want in fantasy football. And I think, especially since he's coming off a broken leg, I just don't really see why you would do that. They also have Case Keenum there, which, I mean, I think he's probably going to end up being the week 1 starter. But I don't really see much upside in him either. And then Dwayne Haskins is somebody that I think could get the starting job at the end of the season. But I wouldn't draft him either, because this is a guy that you don't know when he's going to play, if he's going to play, how he's going to do. There's too much risk. Just let him ride the waivers for a little bit and see how this thing develops. All right, so Washington running backs. They've got a lot of running backs right now. They've got Adrian Peterson coming back. Adrian Peterson was very good last year. Surprised a lot of people. He was the number 16 running back in standard leagues and 19 PPR. But so is he going to repeat this? And I really just have a hard time seeing that, because this guy's getting a year older. He really carried a huge workload last year, and they've got some guys there as well that he wasn't really competing with last year. So first of all, Chris Thompson was hurt for a lot of last season. This guy is a PPR machine when he's healthy. Number 9 running back for the first 3 weeks of the season in PPR. I mean, this guy They love making these change of pace plays with him, and he breaks it open for touchdowns. So I like him as a flyer in the draft because I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten about him. But I mean, so but that's part of why I would not take Adrian Peterson is because they could use him more. And the other reason is because now they have Darius Geis back. Darius Geis, if you remember, was their draft pick from last year. Tore his ACL, didn't play, but he had a lot of hype as potentially a breakout candidate. And honestly, like, I think this is a guy that you want to draft if you already have your running back position set, because this could be huge value for you. This team is going to be constructed very much like last year, where they revolve around Adrian Peterson, or that's what they did last year for moving the chains. And I think Darius Geis could kind of fall into that role and could end up being a great running back. Like, I mean, I honestly could see a situation where this is kind of a crazy take, but I could see a situation where he could be offensive rookie of the year, even though he didn't play last year. So kind of like Ben Simmons. And then you have like Kyler Murray wearing like the definition of a rookie or something on his shirt, like Donovan Mitchell did. No, never mind. That was supposed to be a joke. But I think Darius Geis has got like a lot of value, and this is just somebody that I think that if you're set, this is just great upside you should take. But then they have some other guys too, like they drafted Love out of Stanford, and they still have Samaje Perine, who was good a few years ago. Do not be surprised if one of those, if Samaje Perine gets cut and then ends up being a good value on another team, like maybe as Dallas, maybe he could be a handcuff to Zeke Elliott or something. That's just one of my predictions. So wide receiver. So the Redskins wide receiving core is a mess. They've got Josh Doxson, who this guy has had all the opportunity in the world to fill the receiving voids on this team, but has just done absolutely nothing to take advantage of it. They have Paul Richardson, who's a decent deep threat, but I mean, they're not going to be throwing it deep, so he really doesn't have much value there. They have Trey Quinn, who, I mean, maybe he's a good player as a PPR option, but I mean, he was not really consistent either, and I don't know, I don't really see him holding up. If you're going to take any of these guys, like Terry McLaurin is a third-round pick they got from Ohio State. He could potentially kind of step in and fill a void, so I would maybe take him as a flyer. But just don't really expect a lot from these receivers, the way this offense is constructed. And then, all right, tight end, do not take Jordan Reed. Like, there's always so much hype that it's like, oh, this guy could turn around this year, though. But he's always injured. Like, you know, like, you just know as an owner of Jordan Reed that, like, you're going to have to sit him for half the season. So I've owned him multiple seasons, and I've just basically given up on him because he's just proven time and time again that he can't stay healthy. And just why put yourself through that? They also have Vernon Davis, who is interesting, but he really was not that productive last year either. So I just stay away from tight ends on this team altogether. Like, honestly, the only offensive players I would draft on the Redskins are Darius Geis, Chris Thompson, and then maybe Terry McLaurin. And I think that's it. Because the rest of this is just not great for fantasy football. So the Redskins defense, I think this could be a great value. I could see them being a top 5 defense. They got Landon Collins from the Giants, who is easily their best defensive player. Excellent pick at the end of the draft to get Montez Sweat. He could potentially fill in as an elite linebacker, and you know they load up on their secondary a little bit again. It's just like I think this team could potentially be a top 5 defense, and I think they're going to be in a lot of very close games that are low scoring, and I think this is a good defense to consider late in the draft that could give you a lot of value. And then their kicker is Dustin Hopkins. He's an okay kicker. He's not necessarily the most consistent at times, but he does give you a pretty good floor, and I think that's a solid kicker to take at the end of the draft as well. All right, so that concludes my analysis of the NFC East. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the NFC North, and then we'll keep continuing with the division previews. So like or comment, and let me know what you think, and I'll try to get back to you. So, all right, thanks again. Bye.